I was having y'all. It's your boy Rico from StreetScores, and man, oh man, Dan Quinn and Adam Peters are not playing with anybody. They already cut a 2024 fifth round pick. I'm gonna dive into why that's so shocking. This guy is going into his second off season. He hadn't even had a chance to go into his second regular season yet. He only played a couple of snaps for us last year, and that was only on special teams, and he's already cut based off of how he played in that Patriots preseason game. We're going to dive into all of that. Also, we signed two talented cornerbacks. Already broke down the linebacker that we signed yesterday, so make sure you go check out that video. It ended up being 8 roster moves in total, so we got to dive into all of that. Of course, I'm going to give y'all my reaction and analysis to every little thing, and I want to do a deep dive, especially into one of the corners that we ended up signing. But before we get into everything, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned for all of the content. Since we have a free day where it's only like a walkthrough, I'm gonna do another video that I want to break down about Dan Quinn's very interesting and unique practice strategy. You're gonna want to hear this, man. So literally, like, just later on today, be on the lookout. I will be putting out another video on Dan Quinn's strategy as to how to fix everything that went wrong against the Patriots, man. I like it, man. It's something unique that we're only able to do because we're going from a preseason game on the 8th to the next one being on the 18th. So we have this big gap with no joint practice in the middle. So Dan Quinn was like, all right, let's try something new. So stay tuned for that video as well. Without further ado, let's go and dive into this video right now, man. Let's get it. Adam. All right, so the Washington Commanders got busy today, man. Earlier today, 9:30 a.m., it was announced that we signed cornerback Eang Basy, cornerback Antonio Hamilton Sr., and linebacker Duke Riley. Again, already did a full breakdown of Duke Riley and how he's going to fit on this defense and why I actually think he has a chance to make the final 53-man roster. Even though we signed him like nearly mid-August, I still think he has a real chance of making this final roster going into the regular season. I think he'll actually play in games, and I broke down what he's good at and how he could help Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu and even Jordan McGee and those guys. And so check out that video. We're here to talk about later on in the video. This will be the last thing we discuss, us signing the 2 other corners that we brought in. But we also released defensive end Viliami Fehoko Jr. and cornerback Allen George, and most notably linebacker Dominique Hampton. We're going to talk about that very soon. And then we also placed tackle Lucas Niang, who tore his ACL in that game, on the injured reserve, along with cornerback Kayvon Seymour, who seemed to be hobbled up in that preseason game as well. Both of those guys got hurt in the preseason game, and now they're both on the injured reserve. And now I'm really sad about Lucas Niang. I talked about that extensively in my video yesterday, I believe, or last night, or this morning, whatever it was. I talked about how, like, it sucks because he's a very talented guy. He was a starting offensive tackle for the Chiefs during this Pat Mahomes era at some point, but injuries have just kept him off the field. And your best ability is your availability. He just hasn't been available. He comes here, literally the next practice after we signed him, he's already making noise, and then he gets hurt in the preseason game, torn ACL, out for season. So it really sucks. That's somebody to keep track of maybe for 2026, but 2025, he will not be a part of the team. And then again, Kayvon Seymour, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but at some point in that preseason game, he was hobbled. Again, both of those guys go to the IR. But most notably, out of all of the moves that happened, is the Commanders cutting a 5th round pick just from last draft, like last season, 2024. Remember, they just pulled up in 2024, and this guy was part of their first draft class. This guy hasn't even had a chance to go into his second regular season yet in his NFL career, and he's already been cut. That is actually really crazy to me. And so Dan Quinn even was asked about this right before this, whatever walkthrough we had today, which again, I'm gonna dive into later on in another video. Before that, he talked about Dominique Hampton. He said, if it's not going to fit, we'd rather give him a chance to go to see if he could do his thing somewhere else. Sometimes it's a little easier now than later. And I thought that was an interesting point in a way to word that, because it sounds like he wasn't playing to their standards, but Dan Quinn flipped it and said, well, if we don't like him, maybe we can go ahead and cut him as early as possible to where he can possibly land somewhere else, and maybe they can figure out how to get the most out of him. Maybe he's a better fit for somebody else's defensive system or something like that. But for what we need, he hasn't been able to do that. He hasn't been able to show enough signs to where we believe he'll be able to do it sooner rather than later. And I'm not mad at that. And I mean, you could just tell from the way that preseason game went down and how, I mean, I'm not going to lie, he looked bad in that game. Kane Madrano at least showed flashes. He showed some level of aggression, but Dominique Hampton was getting bullied and pushed around by everybody that blocked him, whether it was offensive linemen or tight ends or whatever. He just seemed to just never be able to get the hang of the tempo of the game, the physicality of the game at all at any point in that preseason game. And there was a lot of bad that came from that preseason game. He may have actually have been the worst of it. And so it really does suck that this is a 5th round pick from just a year ago. You know, those guys stick around for at least 2 years. Like, that's been my logic with Luke McCaffrey. He hasn't necessarily looked really good, but we just drafted him in the 3rd round last year. So he's going to stick around for at least 1 more year. Now I'm not sure if anybody's safe. I thought anybody that was taken in the 2024 draft would at least get 2 years to show what they could do. But Dominique Hampton, they were like, you can go. I mean, if you wanted to hear from Dan Quinn himself, here's a 33-second clip. If you don't want to see that, skip ahead 33 seconds from right now.
It is. It's a hard part of it. And but yeah, we did make that move today. And when you go through it, we were talking about, it's comprehensive of details to go. And sometimes you take it as far as you can, try to give as much support to all the guys as we can. But if it's not going to fit, we'd rather, give him a chance to go see if he can do his thing somewhere else. We got high regard for Dom. We absolutely loved working with him. But if it wasn't going to fit for us, then we want to certainly go give him a chance to go do that. And sometimes it's a little easier now than later.
And now, granted, I haven't gone back to actually look at the all 22 clips and film of the preseason game. I noticed how bad Dominique Hampton was playing live, but for him to get cut immediately after that game, it must have been even worse than what I thought and what I saw live while watching that game with y'all when I did the live stream and everything like that, doing my play-by-play with y'all. So it must have been worse. Again, to cut a second-year player before his second regular season even started, before the guy really even had a chance to ever touch an NFL field, because again, last year I don't think he played in a single game until the very last game, that Cowboys finale, and even then I think it was only special teams. It wasn't even actually like as a linebacker, so he never really got an honest chance to show what he could do. But I guess he looked so bad in practice that he never was awarded the chance. He never really earned the opportunity to go show what he could do on an actual game, in a regular season game and things like that. And then to go out there in that preseason game against 3rd and 4th stringers and look that bad, that was probably the last straw. And Chris Russell brings up a good point. Dominique Hampton, who was cut today by the Commanders, was the lowest graded defensive player on Friday night between the Patriots and the Commanders. He did not get charged with any missed tackles, but the unit was assigned 10 misses total, and Ben Nickel technically led with 3, but he was so bad that even though he wasn't assigned any missed tackles, he was still our lowest graded defensive player out of all of the bad we saw. Out of all of the bad you saw from Carlin Vigors, out of all of the bad you've seen overall from the fact that the Patriots were able to score at will, whether it was their backups versus our backups, their second stringers versus our seconds, their thirds versus our thirds, their fourths versus our fourths. No matter what, it just always seemed to be really bad for us, man. And somehow Dominique Hampton, out of all of that bad, stood out as the worst. Because again, I want to emphasize the fact that like Viliami Fehoko and Allen George were also released, but Dominique Hampton was the only one out of those 3 that just got drafted last year by this team, by Adam Peters. Like, those other guys weren't necessarily Adam Peters and Dan Quinn draft picks. They were signees. They were guys we brought in as free agents, maybe undrafted free agents, kind of, so some people kind of value them somewhat as like a draft pick, but not necessarily. Everybody else, free agent signings. He's the only one out of those 3 that just got cut today that was drafted and handpicked by Adam Peters himself. So that says a lot, which also takes me to the point that I completely agree with Al Galdi when he said respect to Adam Peters for releasing a player in linebacker Dominique Hampton, on whom Peters spent a 5th round pick in the 2024 NFL draft just last year. Zero insecurity from Peters about looking bad for making a bad pick. All about performance and what's best for the team moving forward. I love that point right there. That's immediately what I thought. I was like, oh, wow. So Adam Peters does not care about how things look from the outside. You know what I'm saying? Ron Rivera, you could tell he was doing things because like, oh, man, if we cut this draft pick early and, and then we admit that it was a bad draft pick, the fans are going to be look at us crazy. Everybody around us is going to look at us crazy, and we can't have that. No, Adam Peters is like, man, all I care about is winning. Think about me how you want to. I can be the villain in this Terry situation. I can be the villain or look crazy for drafting a guy in the 5th round and cutting him the next year. I don't care. Whatever leads to winning right now and long term all together, whatever leads to the best possible winning chances we have for both, he's going to make those decisions. And that makes me rest easy knowing that he's our general manager, because winning is above all else. There's no ego. There's no insecurities. I absolutely love it. Thank you, Adam Peters. I don't like the fact that Dominique Hampton turned out to be a bad pick. Of course, I'm not celebrating that. I'm not celebrating Dominique Hampton getting cut, but I am happy that our general manager is willing to do whatever it takes to potentially lead to winning. And so if Dominique Hampton is just so far off from being ready, they feel like they can bring in another guy off of the streets that may be able to contribute to winning now sooner rather than later. And I mean, now we have 2 preseason games to kind of show, find out, okay, so we released Dominique Hampton. Is this guy good enough to replace him as far as like a back end roster guy? If not, cut that guy. Now we have a 3rd preseason game to see what a guy can do. So it makes sense that they got it done as early as possible. And again, Dan Quinn worded it as, well, we're really doing Dominique Hampton a favor by cutting him this early so that he can latch on to another team and have 2 preseason games to show what he can do with that team. And then also shouts out to Burgundy Blog. I agree with him as well. He said if your 5th round pick in year 2 looks hopeless, then yeah, cut him. Credit to Adam Peters for being realistic and decisive. Golf clap. But that situation is not excellence, it's minimum competence. I'm not doing cartwheels over burning a 5th round pick or for 0 snaps or anything like that. But still, I agree. Like, hey, you got to do what you got to do. Sometimes you got to admit, hey, players mess up too. Let's move on. Let's not dwell on it and let us affect us long term, where we're just keeping this guy that really has no chance of having a positive impact on the team just lingering around just simply because we used the draft pick on him. And then also shouts out to the Podfather over there at Burgundy Zone for bringing up the fact that, yeah, Christian Jones was taking the pick immediately after we drafted Dominique Hampton, and he's looking like a really good player over there for the Cardinals. So that does kind of suck. Adam Peters is not going to hit 100% from the field. Nobody does. Not even over Howie Roseman over there, even though he has a knack for drafting dominant Georgia Bulldogs. I warned y'all about that since years ago, but nobody wanted to listen. Now look at him. But nobody shoots 100% from the field. Not even Howie Roseman, even with his genius idea of taking a bunch of Bulldogs. You know what I'm saying? So Adam Peters taking us from 4 wins to 14 should be enough to let you know he makes the right decisions. The respect that he has around the league, even guys like Howie Roseman talking very highly of him, that should tell you everything you need to know about Adam Peters. And the fact that he makes moves like this, of course, he's not going to shoot 100% from the field, but I feel like when in doubt, he's going to make way more shots than he misses. He's going to be right on a lot more decisions than he's wrong, and I can definitely live with that. Also, shouts out to Disco. To my point, he said all teams miss on draft picks, especially mid to late round draft picks. But it's the miss at the position that stings, though. The Commanders need to develop young linebackers behind Wagner and Luvu, because as of right now, one of the draft picks has been released and the other one is injured. And he's talking about Jordan McGee there. And that's a good point, though. That is the scariest part of this, that right now we do not have linebacker depth outside of Bobby Wagner and Frankie Luvu. Jordan McGee has so much talent, but he just stays hurt. He stayed hurt all last offseason. Then he stayed hurt all last regular season and postseason. And then now he's hurt again this offseason. And Dan Quinn's making it sound like it's nothing to worry about. But I believe he said something to the same extent last year, and we barely got to see the guy. Jordan McGee, very talented, when healthy, already having a positive impact on the defense, to the point that Joe Wood Jr. even said it himself. We had plays and formations, entire formations designed around Jordan McGee's availability and his skill set. So him not being out there definitely hurts our defense. It basically sends us into like a mode where we're scrambling and we're trying to think of things on the fly to kind of adjust around and adapt around the fact that we don't have Jordan McGee available. So it does kind of suck. I mean, Dominique Hampton cut, Jordan McGee hurt. What is our plan? Bobby Wagner can't play forever right now. And shouts out to us bringing in Duke Riley. You know what I'm saying? That's a good player right there. Already did a full breakdown on him as to why I think he'll make the final 53-man roster. But just to let you know, He's on the roster, and that's like a decent for now plan, 2025. But what are we doing at linebacker in 2026, especially if Bobby Wagner can't go? Jordan McGee needs to get as many snaps alongside Bobby Wagner as possible, and he needs to figure out how to get rid of this injury bug so that by 2026 and beyond, he's starting next to Frankie Louisville as our two great linebackers. Hopefully, we'll see though, but I don't know, man. Some people are starting to get serious doubts about Jordan McGee. I'm still holding out hope because I'm Mr. Optimistic. That's just who I am, and I really believe in his talent. It's just the injury, man. But some people are like, man, we need to go linebacker in the first round at this point type of thing. People are looking at wide receiver, edge rusher, and linebacker already in the 2026 NFL draft, and I can't be mad at it. But speaking of Duke Riley, Dan Quinn, even before this practice, the walkthrough that they had today, he spoke on adding Duke Riley into the mix. He said, quote, "We just thought it was time. We just felt like we needed another player," unquote. So basically they went into this training camp, and it's really this entire offseason like, well, we're going to give Jordan McGee and Dominique Hampton as many opportunities as they can to show what they could do. Then they also went ahead and drafted Eang Basy in the 6th round of this past draft, and he's showing flashes, but I'm not necessarily sure if he's ready to play on Sundays as a linebacker in the mix. I love his coverage ability. He's already shown a lot of flashes of that so far in training camp and things like that, but is he ready to stop the run? Is he ready to mix it up in the box often? Those were some of the struggles that he had against the Patriots. Again, different from Dominique Hampton. At least it looked like he was constantly trying. At least you saw aggression, you saw physicality. Sometimes he would lose, but it was never from a lack of effort. You know what I'm saying? From him. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's ready to go out there and contribute to positive winning on Sundays, especially playing on a consistent basis. So that's why you bring in a Duke Riley. So again, they went into this offseason with Dominique Hampton and Jordan McGee already. They added a 6th round pick in Eang Basy. All of these guys are 5th and 6th round picks, but they were like, man, these guys have talent. There's some potential there. Let's see what they can do. We get to the first preseason game. Jordan McGee's hurt. Dominique Hampton doesn't look good. And Eang Basy is showing flashes, but not ready yet. So they're like, all right, I guess now it's time to just finally go get a veteran that brings a little bit of floor. We have a bunch of ceiling in the linebacker room behind Louisville and Bobby Wagner, but ceiling can only get you but so far. We need some floor. We need something that we can depend on and count on going into every game on Sunday. And that's why I think Duke Riley will make this roster. But again, I do a full breakdown of that in my video earlier last night. But Ben Standig specifically asked Dan Quinn about adding Duke Riley, but specifically also sticking with the current wide receiver group and not adding one of those. He said, quote, "On linebacker, we just thought it was time. We felt like we needed another player," unquote. But then on wide receiver, he said they're always looking to improve, but, quote, "we do like what we're seeing, but you have to push it," unquote. So linebacker is different. They felt like they needed some floor, where again, there was a lot of talent, but we need a guy that can at least, we know he can go out there on Sundays and play in the rotation alongside Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louisville, and at the very least hold his own. He's healthy, he's dependable, he can play special teams and linebacker on defense. We're decent. Whereas wide receiver, they felt like, I mean, maybe there were some mistakes made, but at least there's maybe some floor there. There's some talent there that maybe they just need to get better. Whereas linebacker, they were like, man, I mean, I don't know if we can depend on Jordan McGee to stay healthy at this point. We can't depend on Dominique Hampton and Eang Basy something clicking and them finally being ready. Whereas the wide receiver group, even some of those guys that have looked silly and made mistakes, they're like, there's a certain floor there that in the wide receiver room that we didn't have in the linebacker room. That's why you signed a linebacker. Now let's dive into the 2 cornerbacks that we signed, and just to let you know, I'm going to give you the heads up now. The first cornerback that we're going to talk about, Eang Basy, I have a lot more to talk about with him than I do the second guy, the Antonio guy. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. But starting with Eang Basy, the Commanders signed cornerback Eang Basy. He was one of the 14 tryout players, and I did a full breakdown of that in yesterday's video, so go check that out if you haven't yet. But he was one of the 14 players that tried out. He's one of the 3 that signed, along with linebacker Duke Riley and also the other corner that we're going to talk about after we break down Eang Basy. And if you look on the screen right now, shouts out to a Lions social media guy that posted this comparison to Mike Sainristil, because this is when Eang Basy was with the Lions, and he said that, I mean, he pointed out the fact that he has a similar profile to Washington Commanders cornerback Mike Sainristil. And he also pointed out the fact that from 2020 to 2023, he had 968 career snaps with the Chargers and the Broncos, and all primarily in the slot, basically. So he's a slot corner. That's why you compare him to a Mike Sainristil. This is not an outside corner. This is purely a slot guy. But at Wake Forest, he had 40 starts and 50 passes defense. So he's a pretty disruptive guy. He may not necessarily get a lot of interceptions, but he gets his hands on the ball and makes sure that the ball ends up incomplete. And when comparing him to Mike Sainristil, I mean, I guess he weighs a little bit more, but then at the same time, he's not quite as strong. I guess you could say that. He's a little faster overall in the 40-yard dash, but technically Mike Sanford still maybe has a quicker acceleration. When it comes to explosion, Mike Sanford still is slightly more explosive. And then also Mike Sanford still is a little bit quicker, I guess, depending on when you're looking at the shuttle. But then when it came to 3-cone, Eang Basy was a little bit quicker. At the same time, though, basically, they're essentially the same athlete at the end of the day. You know, technically, Mike Sanford still is slightly more athletic, but at the end of the day, they are very similar in athleticism, and Mike Sanford still's athleticism is great enough. So Eang Basy, I would say his is as well. And even coming out of college, now this is when he was coming into the draft in 2020, but coming out of college, at a certain point, he had 0 penalties, and he had the most snaps of all corners coming into that draft class with 0 penalties. You see, he had 863. Then you had Juju Hughes, who had 860. Then you had Karan Merrill, and then you had Chase Lucas. 0 penalties with all of those 863 snaps is actually really insane. And then even moving on, forced incompletion wise, this is again as of 2020 when this stat was updated. He had the most forced incompletions since 2017 out of all college quarterbacks, ahead of Amik Robertson, ahead of AJ Green, and even Jeff Gladney and Parnell Motley as well, man. So shouts out to Eang Basy with his 48 compared to the others 41, 41, and 40. And again, this is since 2017. This is a guy that knows how to force incompletions. And even with a short time that he was with the Chargers, at some point when he first got signed through week 11, the Chargers were allowing 13.4 yards per reception to slot receivers, right? And that was the highest average in the league at that point. Then they brought in Eang Basy, and then over the course of the next 2 games, that number went from 13.4 yards per reception to slot receivers to 8.7, which was the 8th lowest over that 2-game span. So they went from the worst in the NFL to top 8 as far as allowing reception yards to slot receivers per reception and stuff like that. So this guy came in and made an immediate impact for the Chargers. And then even like this one game versus the Bears, this was uploaded on October 30th. So I'm assuming that the game happened sometime like the 29th or something like that. Or maybe it happened on the 30th, maybe the 28th. But either way, just know back in late October of 2023, the Chargers played the Bears, and he was the highest graded defender on the entire team with an 84.7, even above Joey Bosa, who had an 82.7, linebacker Kenneth Murray, who had an 80.9, edge Khalil Mack, who had a 76.9, and then linebacker Deion Henley with a 72.2. Out of all of the defensive players in that game against the Bears, he was the highest graded. And those other guys had good grades, he just graded higher. And then also, just to run down his history real quick, Basy appeared in 43 games for the Broncos and the Chargers between 2020 and 2023, but he was out of the league after being cut by the Lions last summer for whatever reason. He didn't latch on to any team at all in the 2024 season. He has 60 tackles and an interception and a fumble recovery in his NFL career so far. And I think that interception was like the 49ers receiver. It was thrown to him, like it went through his hands, it went up into the air, and then he was there to make sure to catch it and complete it. So it wasn't like an amazing play where he jumped a route or something like that. It kind of fell into him. He pretty much caught it like a punt, but still, that's cool that he got that interception. And shouts out to Brian Manning for like this full rundown of his past. He said Basy, who turns 27 this week, and just to let you know, yes, he's 27. He's still young. Maybe there's some potential there. Played collegiately at Wake Forest, where he was a 2-time All-ACC selection. The 5'10", 190-pound Basy entered the NFL as an undrafted free agent in the 2020 NFL Draft, signing with the Denver Broncos. He spent 2 seasons with the Broncos before he was released in December 2021, his second season, and claimed off waivers by the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers then waived him at the conclusion of that season, and Denver claimed him back off waivers and signed him to a futures contract. Then Basy was released during Denver's final cuts ahead of the 2022 season, then re-signed with the practice squad. 2 weeks later, he was promoted to the active roster. He re-signed with Denver following the 2022 season, but was released in October 2023. And then again, the Chargers claimed Basy off of waivers. He just kept bouncing from Chargers, Broncos, Chargers, Broncos. That's pretty crazy. And then again, the Chargers claimed him off of waivers. He signed with the Detroit Lions last summer, but he was released during Detroit's final cuts for whatever reason. And then Basy's connection to Washington specifically is defensive backs coach Tom Donatel. Remember, that's our defensive backs coach. He was with the Basy when they were at the Chargers together for his multiple stints there. While the Commanders' top cornerbacks are healthy, others such as Bobby Price and Kayvon Seymour are banged up. Again, Seymour just went to IR, and Bobby Price is going through concussion protocol after that preseason game against the Patriots, just to let you know. So that's why we have an open roster spot for those guys. I'm not giving these guys the best chance of making the 53-man roster, but with those injuries to the back, those back guys that's on the bubble of the roster, and they don't have a great chance either. Now Eang comes in and has a chance to compete. We'll see what happens, especially going against our receivers. Can't wait to see what he does in this upcoming preseason game against the Bengals. I'm not sure if he's necessarily going to be out there against Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, but he'll be out there against guys like maybe Jermaine Burton and those people. And then just injury history-wise, he missed 4 games due to an ACL tear that he had week 13 of the 2020 season, so he missed the last 4 games, and that was really it. And then even coming back from the rehabilitation, he missed 8 games going into the 2021 season, and then he suffered a hamstring issue, like a strain or something like that, week 6 of the 2022 season. But other than that, he's been flawless health-wise. He's not really like an injury risk type of guy, a super injury-prone type of person. So at the very least, he comes in. You're not necessarily worried about him getting hurt, but we still got to see where he goes with this. There's talent, but there must be a reason that he went the entire 2024 season without being on a roster. And then moving on, you have Antonio Hamilton Sr. He's a former South Carolina State Bulldog. He just signed with the Commanders to a free agent contract. Of course, he was also one of the guys that pulled up for that tryout in yesterday's practice. And if you look on the screen right now, relative athletic score wise, great explosion, good speed, but poor agility. So, I mean, he's a pretty good athlete. Change of direction isn't that good. He can move a little bit, and he's pretty explosive, but that change of direction stuff is a little fuzzy. And then also, he's a little undersized, not crazy undersized. Like, his size is okay. Like, being 5'11" is cool, and being nearly 190 pounds, that's cool as well. So that's not too bad. Maybe they see him as potentially like another slot corner as well. Maybe we just sign 2 slot corner backup type of guys to the roster. And just to run it down, his history, I mean, he was with the Raiders for 2 seasons, and in that time he played in 12 games, started none. Then he was with the Giants from 2018 and in 2019, and he played in 29 games and only started 2. And then in 2020, he was with the Kansas City Chiefs. He played in 16 games, started none. And then in 2021, he ended up with the Cardinals, stayed there all the way through 2023. And with them, out of those 3 seasons, he played in 31 games and technically actually started 16 of them. So that's when he had his biggest opportunity with the Cardinals most recently at ages 28, 29, and 30. So yes, he is up there in age. Going into this 2025 season, he will be 32 years old. So he's kind of an older corner, not some guy that we can kind of look at like maybe there's some untapped potential there, kind of like Eang Basy. Nah, this guy's pretty much who he is, a rotational depth piece corner. But again, like as recently as 2023, he started 9 games with the Cardinals and even had an interception in one of those games and 11 passes defense in that season. Then in 2024 with the Falcons, his most recent team, played in 11 games, started none. But again, this is a guy that plays. He's there. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's playing double-digit games every season since 2018. So this is a guy that comes in with even more experience than Eang Basy. I would say Eang Basy comes with a higher ceiling, but this Antonio kid definitely comes in with a higher floor to where if you just need a backup, a rotational guy, just in case if there's an injury or whatever, he's your guy. But then also, I do want to emphasize the fact that no matter how much potential a guy that we sign has, if we sign him mid-August, I just want to warn y'all, then there's probably a reason that the guy was available. Never say never, of course. Yes, I know that. He could somehow end up being, either of these 2 guys can end up being a great player for us somehow, Antonio or Eang. But I don't want people thinking we just signed future Hall of Famers today. I don't even want to try to hype that up or try to clickbait y'all into that. That's why I said in the title, talented corners. I didn't say freak athlete. I didn't say super game changers. I didn't say future Hall of Famers. These are talented corners that are going to compete in these upcoming preseason games and these training camp practices. We'll see where it goes. And then also, it is fair to point out that the Commanders are set at corner as far as starters at least go, and even backups too, because Lattimore, Sanford and Trenavian Amos are your starting corners, with Mike Sanford still starting in the slot. Jonathan Jones and Noah Benaghy can both play slot or outside corner, but I prefer them in the slot, but they're decent backups. They were both starters just this past 2024 season. Noah Benaghy was a starting slot corner for us, and Jonathan Jones was a starting corner for the Patriots just last season. So we have startable backups as our depth. So we're 5 deep at corner, and then we'll see if one of these guys can end up making enough of an impression to be maybe that 6th or 7th corner that they keep, even though I highly doubt we do. I think the most we'll keep is 6, but we'll see, especially since we have so many safeties that contribute on special teams. But we'll definitely see where this goes. And then, I mean, of course, the team is really high on Carlin Vigors. Like, even though he struggled in that second half, they're still very high on him. He played the most snaps out of any defensive player in that entire preseason game against the Patriots. So watch out. That's somebody that, as of right now, maybe is leading for that 6th spot. He's a undrafted free agent rookie that they're just like, man, this guy's some ceiling to him. He's made mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes in that Patriots preseason game, but he's looked pretty good at times in training camp. So this is a guy we're going to bank on his future, but you never know. If an Eang or Antonio come in here and they're balling out, maybe they're able to steal that 6th spot from Carlin Vigors. We'll see. But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know if you feel about everything discussed in the video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned to all of the content. Really appreciate y'all for supporting the video. You made it this far in the video. You're still watching me and listening to my voice. I appreciate you. Salute to you personally. Thank you. Make sure you leave a like on the way out. And of course, let me know in the comment section how you feel about the Commanders already cutting a 5th round 2024 draft pick. That's actually really crazy. Also, let me know how you feel about the guys that they added, most notably the 2 corners that I broke down, Eang Basy and Antonio Hamilton. Let me know how you feel about everything. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of my points. And of course, I really appreciate y'all. Leave a like on the way out. I'm gonna catch y'all later with another video. I'm out.